Right, we now come to the urgent question, where I call the Shadow Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper,
to ask the Home Secretary to make a statement on border security.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The security of the UK border is a top priority for me, for the Home Secretary and for the Home Office. Everything we do in this area is designed to reduce risks to this country and its citizens. Border Force performs checks on 100% of scheduled passengers arriving in the UK and risk-based intelligence-led checks on general aviation. It's deeply disturbing that information, which has no basis in fact, was leaked by the independent Chief Inspector to a national newspaper before the Home Office had the chance to respond. We are urgently investigating this breach of confidential information in full, in the normal way. Moving to yesterday's changes to the immigration rules, since the launch of our Ukraine schemes, the UK has offered or extended sanctuary to over 280,000 Ukrainians, thanks to the immense generosity of the British public. And I know that colleagues across the House are very grateful for all of the work that's been going on in communities to facilitate that support. Almost 2 years on from the start of the conflict, the UK government's commitment to the Ukrainian cause remains undimmed. It's right that we continue to adapt and develop our visa routes to ensure they keep pace with the rapidly shifting situation in Ukraine. We must ensure they remain as efficient and sustainable as possible, while providing stability for those we've welcomed to the UK and those who still need our sanctuary. Ukrainian nationals who may have previously been eligible to apply to come to the UK under the Ukraine Family Scheme will remain eligible to apply for the Homes for Ukraine sponsorship scheme. Separately, the government remains wholeheartedly committed to reducing levels of legal migration. Measures to curb immigration abuse and further reduce net migration are being implemented, ranging from salary increases to work and family visas, reforming the shortage occupation list, removing the right for overseas care workers to bring dependents, and requiring care providers to be CQC registered before hiring overseas carers. The rule changes outlined yesterday, which relate to the care sector, pave the way for those measures to take effect.
Yvette Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's reported today that hundreds of high-risk private flights have landed in the UK without proper border security checks being done. If the Minister disputes the figures, can he tell us the true ones now? Were all the high-risk private flights checked or not? Ministers have been repeatedly warned about border security risks on private flights. The Prime Minister may think it's just all his own mates, but there are real risks from organised crime, money laundering, drugs and weapons smuggling, trafficking and even terrorism. There's been a 75% drop in Class A drugs border seizures. There's been a 39% drop in firearms seizures, criminal gangs still organising dangerous boat crossings, repeated failures in security checks at Western Jet Foyle, 30% drop in foreign national offender removals, a 50% drop in failed asylum seeker removals, new revelations of visa failures in the Home Office, where the Home Office has issued 275 visas to a care home that didn't even exist. And instead of getting any grip, what's the Minister's response? Just to sack the border inspector and instead sit on his reports, and changing the rules to stop Ukrainian family members coming here. What message of solidarity does that send to a country we're supposed to be supporting in the face of Russian aggression? Will he now publish all the outstanding inspectors' reports? And will he tell us, is it true there will now be no inspector in place for the next 6 months? And tell us the key border security facts. Have all high-risk private flights been met and checked in the last year, something Home Office ministers promised me in this chamber 13 years ago would happen? And if not, tell us now how many high-risk flights, maybe involving dangerous people and weapons, have been allowed into this country without proper border security checks. The Conservatives have broken the asylum system, bust the Home Office budget, badly undermined Britain's border security and put our country's security at risk. Will they ever get a grip?
Minister.
Well, I have to say that I'm very disappointed, particularly in relation to...
Absolutely right.
I'm very disappointed with the Right Honourable Lady's response on the issue of the certainty that the announcement that was made yesterday in relation to Ukraine provides. We had a very good debate just before the February recess involving colleagues from across the House where there were calls for certainty around the future of those visa schemes. The government has come forward and provided that assurance about where we go from here. Of course, the first of those visas don't expire until 2025. If you then add that 18-month period on, that adds an additional 2.5 years of certainty for individuals from the here and now, which I think is very welcome, and there will continue to be an in-country and out-of-country approach to this. And we, of course, engage with our Ukrainian friends and allies and will support them in any way that we can, and we are ahead of the curve internationally in giving that assurance, and she should be on the front foot in welcoming that because it is good, positive news. In terms of the question about the publication of the ICI-BI reports, we will publish those reports and our responses to them. That will happen soon. And when it comes to the questions that she raises around these flights at London City Airport and the information that's been put in the public domain, the Home Office categorically rejects these claims by David Neal. Mr Neal's report into general aviation border checks at London City Airport was submitted last week and underwent fact-checking as is standard practice. Mr Neal was made aware of a specific issue with the recording of data at London City Airport, which meant that a large proportion of flights recorded as high risk should have been reclassified as low risk, and it's disappointing that he's chosen to put misleading data into the public domain. The Home Office's priority is to deliver a safe and secure border, and we will never compromise on this. And where we're notified of a GA flight, we cleared 100% of high-risk flights, either remotely or in person, in accordance with the GA guidance. And we're committed to responding effectively using an intelligence-led approach, as well as thoroughly working with the wider law enforcement community. She will appreciate that there is a report in relation to this issue. We will go through the proper process in responding to that report, and that will have answers to these substantive points that have been posed as part of the inspector's report, dealing with that in entirely the proper way. It was rather ironic, I have to say, the Honourable Lady, the Right Honourable Lady, talking about the opposition's stance when it comes to the security of our border. She voted against, quite happily voted against, the Nationality and Borders Act when we legislated to introduce electronic travel authorisations, which is critical to the future of our border security and allowing greater automation for passengers, improving the passenger experience at the border, whilst being robust on border security. She's chuntering away, but she voted against those important measures. And when it comes to, for example, dangerous foreign criminals on our streets, we hear the benches opposite opposing those removal flights. In fact, the Leader of the Opposition and others taking that stance. They would allow dangerous criminals and dangerous individuals to be on the streets of the United Kingdom. And of course, this government also has a credible plan when it comes to the stopping of the small boat crossings of the Channel and all of the risks to our security that presents, as well as the wider criminality. Again, she's opposed all of those steps. We have a plan. We are working through it. That is the position, and I think that is clear for all to see.
So Desmond Swayne.
Mr. Speaker, either I misheard or the suggestion from the benches opposite that the measure that the Minister has introduced will prevent Ukrainian family members coming to Britain is deeply untrue and highly irresponsible, isn't it?
Minister.
I think my Right Honourable friend summarises the situation very neatly. There will continue to be an in-country opportunity for people to apply to extend their visas, and through the Homes for Ukraine scheme, Ukrainians will still be able to come to the UK to access that sanctuary that we are right to be proud in supporting, and that we've seen communities across the country doing an enormous amount of positive, welcome work to support that national effort. Any suggestion that will not be the case moving forward is wrong, and it is deliberate scaremongering, and people should stop it.
SNP spokesperson Alison Thewliss.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, there's a bitter irony that the UK government make these changes to health and social care visas, a sector that's crying out for people, but they want to make it more difficult for people to come and look after our loved ones. And they say, come and look after our loved ones, but you just can't bring your own. How utterly, utterly heartless. And this is, of course, a sector that is dominated by women who are more likely to have children. So what a quality impact assessment has he carried out on these very poor plans? And what advice is he taking from the Migration Advisory Committee? Because this is, of course, a crisis of their own making. They encouraged the government to pay more to people in the health and social care sector and commended Scotland, who has less reliance on people coming in because we have a workforce strategy and we pay care workers the real living wage. Will he do the same? Mr Speaker, Saturday the 24th of February marks 2 years since this escalation of Russian aggression in Ukraine, 2 years longer than any of us would have wanted to see. So we are appalled that in this particular week the UK Government have made it more difficult for Ukrainians to seek sanctuary here, to close the Ukraine family scheme with immediate effect at 3 p.m. yesterday with absolutely no notice. He's talked of an extension by 18 months, but for new applications they've reduced that from years to 18 months, and those who hold visas now can't sponsor. So those perhaps wives who want to bring injured husbands to live here now presumably can no longer do so. How can he say that is fair, Mr Speaker? And how can the government say Slavia Ukraine while closing the door to those in need?
Well, to deal with the latter points first, that just isn't the case. There continues to be a route for Ukrainians to be able to come to the United Kingdom. It is arguably a more effective route in facilitating that sanctuary for people with all the enhanced checks and support that come with the Homes for Ukraine routing. And there is that ability for people to be able to sustain and to extend that sanctuary here in the UK if they are already here. That is something that she should welcome. She was involved in the Westminster Hall debate before the recess like I was. I'm proud of the work that we as a government are taking forward to support communities to facilitate that sanctuary, and we will continue to be front-footed and forward-leaning when it comes to doing so, because this is morally critical that we are at the forefront, and we are giving that certainty to people way ahead of our international allies, which again I think she should welcome. When it comes to the issue of care workers, as I've said on many occasions, the current situation when it comes to dependents is disproportionate. We saw 120,000 dependents come with 100,000 care workers. That is not sustainable in the longer term, and that is why we are taking forward the measures that we are. And she mentioned specifically the Migration Advisory Committee. What they have consistently said is that migration is not the answer to workforce shortages in the social care sector, and that's why the government has invested £7.5 billion to support the strategy for social care, workforce development and boosting capacity in social care, including through retention of the dedicated workforce who already undertake these vital roles. And I can also say, as a former Minister for Disabled People at the Department for Work and Pensions, I also firmly back the government's work that we are doing to try and support more people domestically into work through the comprehensive Back to Work plan. She should be supporting those efforts. We're putting real resource in behind that. That should be our first port of call.
Lee Anderson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I welcome the news that the Ukrainian visa scheme has been extended by 18 months. That's very generous. But could the Minister please confirm that whilst ever there is a war in Ukraine and whilst ever it is unsafe for these families to return, they will have a home in this country?
Minister.
I know that my honourable friend cares very deeply about the sanctuary, as I do and as colleagues across government do, and I would argue members across this House do too, about the importance of providing that sanctuary for our Ukrainian friends. And we're all incredibly moved, I think, by what we've seen in our communities in terms of people rallying behind those Ukrainians to support them and to provide that warm welcome. We will continue to sustain that effort. We do that in a way that is in partnership with the Ukrainian government. We regularly discuss these matters with them. And of course, we will continue to sustain that sanctuary for the course of the duration of this invasion. And we're firmly on the side of the Ukrainians in winning this war.
Chair of the Select Committee, Dame Diana Johnson.
Mr Speaker, accountability and oversight are critical to the effective management of UK border security, and the Home Affairs Select Committee has been repeatedly questioning the government about the delay in publishing the Chief Inspector's reports by the Home Office, and I understand there are now 15 reports outstanding. We're also concerned, as the Chief Inspector is the statutory body and there is no deputy and no provision for this institution to exist without the Chief Inspector in post, and with David Neil now leaving at the end of March, can the Minister just update the House on what has happened to the recruitment process that ended in December, and when will the Home Affairs Select Committee get the pre-appointment hearing that we are entitled to have for the new post, for the new Chief Inspector?
Minister.
I think the chairman of the committee will appreciate that it wouldn't be appropriate for me to comment on appointment-related matters, but we will follow, of course, the proper process in appointing a Chief Inspector of Borders and Immigration. And when it comes to the laying of the responses from the government to the reports that actually the Shadow Home Secretary asked about as well, as I said in response to that question, this will happen soon.
Bob Black.
Mr. Speaker, people who want to work in our care sector from other countries are welcome to do so where it's appropriate. However, the current model is that many of them are paying thousands of pounds to agents who then contact care home owners in this country, and even if they don't have any vacancies, they'll allow them to come here, then they'll send them off to work in supermarkets or other areas, and then the pay goes back to the agent. The individuals don't even get the pay. This is a clearly criminal conspiracy. So will my honourable friend take measures to combat this and prevent it happening, and people who want to come and work here are actually being exploited ruthlessly?
Minister.
Where we see abuse of our migration routes, we will root that out and deal with it robustly. It's one of the reasons why such an important part of the package of measures that we're taking forward has been that CQC accreditation angle, making sure that the roles that people are coming here to fulfil are credible, real jobs within these workplaces. We think it's right that there is a better audit trail in relation to those appointments and those roles that people come to take on, not least for the very reason that he highlights around minimising those risks of people being exploited and cheated and sold a fake prospectus of what it is that they're signing up for. That cannot be right, and it's right that we as a government take a robust posture in dealing with it.
Angus Brendan McNeill.
Tappler, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for taking this urgent question. As you know, I tabled something similar after the BBC and Guardian reported that it was unexpectedly, the family reunification was unexpectedly closed. And I'd warned the government for the Ukrainian families. I'd warned the government against such mean-mindedness. The UK was the meanest-minded in Europe at the outbreak of the Ukrainian war. It caused a lot of work for civil servants, for government themselves, and for MPs, and all unnecessarily. But most importantly, it caused angst for families in the Hillingen and Year and elsewhere, and concern and worry for those who want to come to the islands and elsewhere. Why? I'd ask him to think again, and can he confirm exactly what he's done? Because I've got a feeling he's been economical with clarity here. Are the BBC and Guardian wrong in what they've reported?
Minister.
The position is very clearly that we have been arguably the most generous when it comes to the approach that we have adopted with providing sanctuary for our Ukrainian friends. There will continue to be an out-of-country route through the Homes for Ukraine scheme for people to be able to come here through that routing, as well as the extension to those visas. And as I've said, we are getting on the front foot earlier than others in providing the certainty and in terms of the length of those visas. Those are measures to be welcomed. They're not measures to be traduced.
Exactly. Tom Hunt.
Speaker, of course there is a certain irony about the members opposite going on about border security, then a lot of them try to prevent a load of convicted criminals from being deported. I, of course, welcome the changes in terms of income tax thresholds going up for getting visas, and of course the changes in the social care workers as well. I've been very concerned that actually other countries have produced evidence about how that route was abused, and I think it's right that you clamp down on dependents coming here as well. But in terms of these welcome changes when it comes to net legal migration, will the ministers bring evidence and data to show the public soon that finally it is heading in the right direction, they are being heard to? Because I'm incredibly concerned that if mainstream parties such as ourselves do not get it and show the public we get it on migration, it will fuel the extremes.
Mainstream. Minister.
My honourable friend speaks with real passion, and I know that people in Ipswich feel very strongly about this. That is why, as a government, we have a credible plan to bring the numbers down. We believe that the inflows would be reduced by 300,000, taking these changes that we are delivering into account relative to the year prior. And in terms of his request around what we can do to report around that and to provide information about the progress that we're making, that is something that I am considering.
Mr. Carmichael.
So when does the Minister expect the next Chief Inspector of Immigration and Borders to take up the post?
We will follow the proper process to make an appointment.
Jack Burton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Whilst it's obviously right that we've helped those in Ukraine who urgently needed our help, When it comes to net migration, most people in Stoke-on-Trent and wider North Staffordshire think that these figures have been unacceptably high, and this has had a significant pressure on some of our local services across Stoke-on-Trent and North Staffordshire. So would my honourable friend the Minister agree with me that it's right that those who have come here, have used the services, have taken from those services, but not contributed to the cost, that it's right that they should face higher visa and nationality fees?
So the government's position is, and he's right to touch on the sort of general feeling in Stoke-on-Trent about the net migration situation, and that's why we're taking action. But we as a government do feel that when it comes to the borders and migration system, that the cost that we charge to be able to access those services is reflective of the costs that are incurred, that those costs shouldn't fall to the UK taxpayer to pick up, and that it should actually be those individuals who are availing themselves of those services that should be covering the costs of those, and that is something that we continue to work towards in greater detail.
Tonia Antoniazzi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. General aviation has been consistently flagged as a danger to national security. Does the Minister agree that failure to check those arriving into the UK this way is putting the United Kingdom at risk?
I would refer her to what I said in relation to the Shadow Home Secretary's earlier contribution and the questions that she asked around this. This is, of course, something that we treat with the utmost seriousness, and we will, of course, respond to the ICIBI report in the proper way, in a thoroughgoing way, having considered the points that have been raised within it, and making sure that any proper fact-checking is also carried out for the reasons I've touched on.
Joanna Chorry.
If the purpose of yesterday's announcement was to provide some reassurance to Ukrainian citizens who have sought refuge in the UK, why is the government forcing these people to go through yet another application? Every member of this House will have experienced the problems supporting the initial applications. There will be delays, different family members will get confirmation at different times, children will be dropped off by mistake, causing great distress. My question to the Minister is this: shouldn't UKVI be focusing on its existing backlog rather than adding unnecessary processes to its workload and distressing Ukrainian families who are now our constituents and living in the United Kingdom?
I disagree with her. We think that this is an appropriate approach to extending those visas. It is right and proper that there is a proper process around that. There are obviously reasons why visas are handled in this particular way. There are safeguarding concerns that come into all of these matters when it comes to extensions as well, and that is the reason why we will take the approach that we are. But I want this to be as light touch as possible. I want it to be as easy as possible, and I think that all parliamentarians in this House should be giving reassurance today about the fact that those Ukrainian people who are in our country, who are accessing that sanctuary, will continue to be able to do so. That is the responsibility, I would argue, as all of us as leaders in our country.
Barry Sherman.
Mr. Speaker, a lot of the people in this country, including my constituents, will be amazed that in this week, the week of Navalny's murder by Putin, and by the tough times that the Ukrainians are facing against the Russian reinforcements, that this is the day that they announce that there are going to be restrictions on Ukrainian families coming here. And could I tell you also that I have campaigned for a long time because so many wealthy Russian plutocrats have been flying into this country on small aircraft, private aircraft and helicopters for a long time. I've asked questions about this. Perhaps we should ask Boris Johnson's friend in the House of Lords, Lord Lebedev of Hampton and Siberia, what he knows about it.
The fact is that we are providing the certainty that members across this House have been seeking when it comes to the future of the Ukraine scheme. He wasn't, I don't think, in the debate that we had prior to the February recess, but the House spoke, I would argue, with one voice in saying that we need to afford that sanctuary for longer, recognising that the war remains ongoing, but that the Ukrainian people continue to have our firm backing in their fight against the Russian aggression. That is precisely what we've done through this announcement. I reject his characterisation of the situation. The message needs to go out that Ukrainians who are here will continue to be able to have that sanctuary in the years ahead.
Kirsten Oswald.
Mr Speaker. Families in all our constituencies, including in East Renfrewshire, rely upon the skills and compassion of people who work in the care sector. And the Chief Executive of Scottish Care, Donald McCaskill, yesterday described this government's plan to ban overseas care workers from bringing dependents as shameful and damaging, saying treating international colleagues this way is contemptible. He's right, isn't he?
Not good for Scotland. There will continue to be an opportunity for international recruitment for care purposes, but what we cannot have is a situation where we see 120,000 dependents come with 100,000 visa holders. That is not justifiable. That is not acceptable. That is why we're taking the approach that we are, and there will need to be in future a blend of approach to recruitment. I also happen to think it's right that we should strain every sinew to support people in this country to take on these roles with the proper skills, and that's precisely what the Back to Work plan does.
Marine Fellows.
Mr Speaker, closing the Ukrainian family scheme almost 2 years to the day since the anniversary of Putin's illegal war is particularly cruel. The government speaks of rationalisation of the schemes, but what we really need is further measures to support family reunification. What reassurance can this government give to those on these schemes that they will be able to bring family members to the UK given these changes?
Correct. Well done.
We always keep under review the offer that we have as part of the Ukraine scheme. That will continue to be the case. But I again just reiterate the point that what we have done through this package of changes in its entirety is to sustain an out-of-country route for Ukrainians to be able to come to the UK to seek sanctuary, whilst also giving certainty ahead of many other countries, including European Union countries with which I know she has an affinity. But we have got ahead of the curve on this and giving that certainty around sanctuary in the way that I think people in this country would want to see.
Stevens.
Speaker, the changes that the government keep making to the Ukrainian scheme has unfortunately resulted in far too many Ukrainians being homeless. So when will the Minister finally, as pledged by his predecessor, to meet Glasgow members of Parliament to discuss how the Home Office policies are making refugees homeless in the city of Glasgow?
Well, actually, what the announcement has done has given real certainty early about the future of the Ukrainian schemes, and we are doing that in a way that is ahead of the curve when you consider the situation internationally. When it comes to asylum accommodation, I am very willing to meet with, he knows me well, and we have always had a constructive working relationship. I am very willing to meet with him to discuss the issue of asylum accommodation and support for refugees in Glasgow. And I know that colleagues in DLUC, who lead on the Ukraine scheme accommodation side of things, I'm sure would also be happy to engage.
Jim Shannon.
Mr Speaker, can I thank the Minister very much for all of those answers and most helpful. In terms of the open border in Northern Ireland, what steps are in place to ensure that Northern Ireland does not become the back door to the rest of the United Kingdom of Great Britain?
So it is absolutely right, as he recognises and as he's alluding to, that we ensure that our approach to border security is properly adopted across the United Kingdom. I was very pleased actually to have a constructive meeting last week as part of conversations with the devolved governments about the future of the Ukraine schemes with the new Deputy First Minister. I've said to her that I'd be very willing to meet. I was delighted to see her in her place taking on those responsibilities, and I'm sure that these are matters that she'll want to discuss.
I thank the Minister for answering the urgent question.